Daniel had always been the careful type, the kind of guy who double-checked his grocery lists and arrived at airports 3 hours early. At 34 years old, he worked as a software engineer in Seattle, spending his days writing code and his evenings watching cooking shows he never actually tried to recreate. His life was comfortable, predictable, and honestly a little boring. Even he would admit that. It all started 3 months before the incident. His girlfriend Rachel had been dropping hints about wanting to do more things together. Real things, she said. Not just Netflix and takeout every Friday night. She'd shown him a flyer for piano lessons at the community center, and somehow, after a glass of wine and her most convincing puppy dog eyes, he'd agreed to sign up. The lessons weren't terrible. His teacher, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kim who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, was patient with his fumbling fingers. She'd tap her wooden ruler against the music stand and remind him to curve his hands like he was holding an orange. Daniel practiced maybe twice a week, usually for 20 minutes before his attention drifted to his phone. He could play a few simple songs. Nothing impressive. Definitely nothing that would make anyone stop and listen. Then Rachel dropped the bomb. Her company was having their annual talent show at a fancy hotel downtown. They'd rented out the entire ballroom. There would be 200 people there, and she'd already signed him up to perform. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. "You did what?" Rachel grinned, completely unbothered by his panic. "Come on, it'll be fun. Everyone does something. Last year, Greg from accounting did a magic trick and messed it up completely. People loved it. Nobody expects perfection. Rachel, I've been playing for 3 months. 3 months. I can barely get through Fur-Elise without making mistakes. So play something easier. Play that nice classical piece you've been working on. The one that goes..." She hummed a melody he vaguely recognized. Daniel spent the next 2 weeks in a state of low-level dread. He practiced more than he ever had, running through his chosen piece until his fingers ached. It was a simple arrangement of a Bach minuet. Pretty, uncomplicated, well within his abilities. Mrs. Kim said he was ready. Rachel said he'd be great. He tried to believe them. The night of the talent show arrived with all the inevitability of a dentist appointment. Daniel stood in the hotel bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and giving himself a pep talk in the mirror. "It's just 3 minutes," he whispered. 3 minutes and it's over. You've practiced. You know this." The ballroom was more intimidating than he'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over round tables draped in white linen. The grand piano sat on a small stage at the front, gleaming black and enormous. 200 of Rachel's coworkers filled the room, laughing and chatting over dessert and coffee. The energy was casual, friendly even, but Daniel's hands were already sweating. He sat through the other acts in a fog of anxiety. Someone sang a pop song off-key. A group of people from marketing did a comedy skit that got decent laughs. A woman played the violin beautifully, which only made Daniel feel worse. Then Rachel squeezed his hand and whispered, "You're up next." "You've got this," the MC called his name. Daniel stood on legs that felt like rubber and walked to the stage. The applause was polite and encouraging. He sat on the piano bench and adjusted it slightly, buying himself a few extra seconds. The keys stretched out before him, black and white and suddenly completely foreign. This was it. Just start. His hands moved into position over the keys. He took a breath. And then his mind went completely, utterly blank. He couldn't remember the first note. Not even the first note. The opening melody that he'd played dozens of times had vanished from his memory like smoke. His fingers hovered uselessly in the air. The silence stretched out, growing heavier with each passing second. Someone coughed. He heard a chair scrape against the floor. Panic flooded through him, hot and overwhelming. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat. 200 people were watching him sit there like a statue. Rachel was watching. He had to do something. Anything. And then, without thinking, without planning, his fingers came down on the keys and played the only song his body seemed to remember in that moment of pure terror. Chopsticks. The simple, childish tune that every kid learns. The one you play at birthday parties and pizza parlors. But Daniel didn't play it normally. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was some weird survival instinct, but he played it with the most dramatic, over-the-top seriousness he could muster. He swayed as he played. He threw his head back like he was performing Rachmaninoff. He made every single note of Chopsticks sound like it was the most important piece of music ever written. The room erupted. People started laughing. Not cruel laughter, but genuine, surprised, delighted laughter. Someone whooped. Someone else started clapping along. Daniel kept going, leaning into the absurdity of it all. If he was going to humiliate himself, he might as well commit to it completely. And then something strange happened. Something he couldn't have predicted or planned. His fingers, still moving through the simple melody, started to add things. Little flourishes here and there. A jazzy chord instead of the basic notes. A run of notes that connected one phrase to another. His hands seemed to know what to do even though his conscious mind was still catching up. The laughter continued, but it started to shift. People were still smiling, still enjoying themselves, but they were also listening now. Really listening. Daniel barely noticed. He was somewhere else entirely, lost in a space where fear and instinct and 3 months of lessons had somehow merged into something unexpected. He played variations on the theme, treating Chopsticks like a jazz standard, then like a romantic ballad, then like something modern and strange. His left hand added bass lines he didn't know he'd learned. His right hand danced across the higher keys, finding melodies within the simple framework. The childhood tune became something else entirely, something that shifted between playful and melancholy, between humor and genuine beauty. The room had gone quiet now. Not the uncomfortable silence of his blank moment at the beginning, but the focused silence of people who'd stumbled into something special. Daniel's eyes were closed. He was barely aware of where he was anymore, only aware of the music flowing through his fingers, of the conversation happening between his two hands, of the way each phrase seemed to suggest the next one. He didn't know how long he played. Time had stretched and warped into something elastic. But eventually, naturally, the music found its way back to where it started. The simple Chopsticks melody, played once more, softly now, gently like a goodnight song. And then his hands lifted from the keys and settled in his lap. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Daniel opened his eyes, blinking as if waking from a dream. The ballroom came back into focus. 200 faces staring at him. And then the applause hit like a wave, loud and thunderous and completely unexpected. People were standing. Rachel had both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide and shining. Daniel stood up on shaky legs and took an awkward bow. He had no idea what had just happened. He'd started to play Chopsticks as a joke, as a panic move, and somehow it had turned into something else entirely. Something that felt, for those few minutes, like the truest thing he'd ever done. Daniel stumbled off the stage in a daze. His hands were trembling and he couldn't quite catch his breath. Rachel practically tackled him with a hug the moment he stepped down. "That was incredible," she said, her voice high with excitement. "How did you even do that? I've never heard you play anything like that." He honestly didn't know what to tell her. I panicked and played Chopsticks, and then I don't know what happened. It just sort of came out." People kept stopping him on his way back to their table. Strangers from Rachel's office, people he'd never met, wanted to shake his hand and tell him how much they'd enjoyed it. One guy, probably in his 50s with a graying beard, grabbed his shoulder and said, "Man, I used to play piano as a kid. You just reminded me why I loved it." That was something special. Daniel smiled and nodded and tried to process what was happening. Special? He'd played Chopsticks and he'd made a fool of himself. Except people weren't treating him like a fool. They were treating him like he'd done something remarkable. Back at their table, Rachel kept replaying what had happened, describing moments he barely remembered. "When you did that thing where the music got all soft and sad, I literally got chills. And the way you built it back up, it was like watching someone paint but with music." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More people approached him. Rachel's boss congratulated him. Someone asked if he gave lessons, which made him laugh out loud. When they finally got back to Rachel's apartment around midnight, she immediately pulled out her phone. "I recorded it," she said, grinning. "The whole thing. You have to watch this." Daniel felt a flutter of anxiety. "I don't know if I want to see it. What if it wasn't actually that good?" "Just watch," Rachel said, pressing play. The video started with him sitting at the piano, frozen like a deer in headlights. Even watching it back, Daniel could feel that moment of pure panic. Then came the first notes of Chopsticks, played with absurd dramatic flair. On screen, he saw himself swaying and gesturing like a concert pianist. It did look pretty funny, But then the music shifted. He watched his own hands begin to improvise, adding layers and complexity to the simple melody, and he could hear it now, really hear it in a way he hadn't been able to while playing. It was good, not perfect. He could spot the mistakes, the moments where his technique wasn't quite right. But there was something genuine in it, something raw and honest that made you want to keep listening. The video ended with the applause. Daniel sat back, stunned. "Huh," he said quietly. Rachel was already typing. "I'm posting this. This needs to be shared." "What?" "No, Rachel, come on. I'm making it public," she said, her thumbs flying across the screen. "The world needs to see this. Trust me." She uploaded it to TikTok with a simple caption, "When stage fright turns into pure magic." Then she posted it to Instagram and Twitter for good measure. Daniel watched with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. Within minutes, a few people had liked it. Then a few more. They went to bed around 1 in the morning. Daniel lay awake for a while, replaying the performance in his mind. He still couldn't quite believe it had happened. Eventually, exhaustion won out and he drifted off to sleep. He woke up to his phone buzzing like an angry hornet. It was 7 in the morning. Bleary-eyed, he picked it up and squinted at the screen. Notifications, hundreds of them. No, thousands. His heart rate kicked up as he opened the apps. The video had 30,000 views. While he was sleeping, it had spread across the internet like wildfire. People were commenting, sharing, tagging their friends. Daniel scrolled through the comments, his eyes widening with each one. "This is what real talent looks like. I've watched this 5 times already and I'm crying." The way he transformed such a simple song into something beautiful, incredible. This is better than half the stuff on the radio. By the time Rachel woke up an hour later, the video had hit 100,000 views. She let out a shriek when she checked her phone. "Daniel, oh my God, it's going viral." The numbers kept climbing throughout the day. 200,000, 500,000. By afternoon, it had crossed 1 million. Daniel called in sick to work because he couldn't focus on anything except watching the view count tick higher and higher. News outlets started picking it up. A local Seattle news blog wrote an article titled, "Software Engineer's Piano Improvisation Captivates the Internet." The comments section became its own universe. Professional musicians started chiming in. A jazz pianist with a verified account wrote, "The harmonic choices here are actually sophisticated. The way he recontextualizes a children's song through different genres shows real musical intelligence." A classical music professor said, "This is a masterclass in theme and variation." Haydn would approve. But the comments that really got to Daniel were from ordinary people. Someone wrote, "I quit piano lessons when I was 10 because I thought I wasn't good enough. This made me want to start again." Another said, "My daughter has been scared to perform in her school recital. I showed her this and she said if this guy can turn a mistake into something beautiful, maybe she can be brave too." By the second day, the video had 15 million views. Daniel's phone hadn't stopped ringing. A local radio station wanted to interview him. A podcaster who focused on creative moments wanted him as a guest. Someone claiming to be from a record label left a voicemail asking about his future projects. It was overwhelming and surreal and frankly a little terrifying. The most unexpected message came from Dr. Patricia Winters. Her email was formal but warm. She explained that she taught composition at Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world, and she was fascinated by what he'd done. "Spontaneous composition is a field I've been researching for years," she wrote. "What you did on that stage represents something I try to teach my most advanced students. The ability to surrender to the moment and let music happen through you rather than from you. Would you be willing to discuss this with me? I'd love to include your experience in a paper I'm writing." Daniel read the email 3 times. A professor from Juilliard wanted to study what he'd done. Him, a guy who'd been playing piano for 3 months and still couldn't sight read basic sheet music. He called Mrs. Kim, his piano teacher, not knowing what else to do. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice as calm as ever. "Daniel, I saw the video. Everyone in my building has seen the video. Mrs. Kim, I don't understand what happened. I just panicked and played the only thing I could remember." There was a long pause. Then she said something that stuck with him. "Sometimes the best music comes not from the mind, but from the moment we stop trying to control everything. You let go. That's the hardest thing to teach." The attention kept growing. Someone made a remix of his performance, adding beats and turning it into an electronic dance track. It got 3 million views. People started posting their own versions, playing chopsticks in different styles as a tribute. The hashtag Chopsticks Challenge started trending. Musicians from around the world were participating, from teenagers in their bedrooms to professional orchestras having fun with it. Daniel watched a video of a street performer in Paris playing his version of Chopsticks, the case in front of him filling with euros as tourists stopped to listen. He saw a grandmother in Tokyo teaching her grandchildren the song, then showing them Daniel's video on her tablet. A high school jazz band in Chicago had arranged it for their entire ensemble. One comment stopped him cold. It was from a user with a simple profile picture, just a gray avatar. The comment said, "I was having the worst day of my life when I stumbled onto this video. I'd just lost my job and was feeling like a complete failure. Watching you turn a mistake into something beautiful reminded me that failure isn't final. Sometimes it's just the beginning of something unexpected. Thank you." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. He'd gone to that talent show terrified of humiliating himself, and somehow, accidentally, he'd created something that mattered to people, not because he was technically perfect or professionally trained, but because he'd been authentically, vulnerably human in front of 200 people, and now millions more. Rachel found him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with wet eyes. "Hey," she said softly, sitting next to him. "You okay?" "People are saying it changed their day," he said, his voice rough. "Some of them are saying it inspired them to try things they were afraid to try. I just played chopsticks, Rachel. I just panicked and made it up as I went along." She took his hand. "That's exactly why it matters. You didn't perform perfection. You performed courage, and people recognize that." The video hit 20 million views by the end of the second day. Daniel's life had transformed in 48 hours, and he had absolutely no idea what came next. The third day after the video went viral, Daniel woke up to find his inbox completely flooded. There were so many messages that his email app was struggling to load them all. Interview requests from morning shows, invitations to perform at various events, companies wanting him to endorse their pianos. Someone even asked if he'd be interested in doing a Super Bowl commercial, which seemed absolutely insane. Rachel had already gone to work, leaving a note on the counter that said, "Call me when you're ready to talk about all this, love you. P.S. You're trending on Twitter again." Daniel made coffee with shaking hands and opened his laptop to assess the damage, or maybe the opportunity. He honestly couldn't tell which it was anymore. The video now had over 25 million views across all platforms. But it wasn't just the views that shocked him. It was how far it had spread. Music blogs were analyzing his improvisation. The classical music subreddit had an entire thread dissecting his technique. A famous film composer had retweeted it with the comment, "This is what happens when you stop thinking and start feeling." His phone rang. The number had a New York area code. Daniel almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "Hello? Is this Daniel? The chopsticks guy?" The voice was young, enthusiastic, speaking quickly. "This is Tyler from Morning Brew. We're a national morning show and we'd love to have you on next week. We could fly you out to New York, put you up in a hotel, the whole thing. We have a piano in the studio. The segment would be maybe 10 minutes. What do you think?" Daniel's mind raced. Can I think about it?" "Absolutely. But just so you know, we've had a ton of requests to book you. Good Morning America is interested. Ellen's people called. You're kind of the moment right now, you know." After he hung up, Daniel sat in stunned silence. Ellen. Good Morning America. This had gone so far beyond anything he could have imagined. He was just a regular guy who'd had one weird lucky moment. How had it become this? His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Kim. "Come to the studio today if you can. We should talk." Daniel showed up at the community center an hour later. Mrs. Kim's teaching studio was on the second floor, a small room with 2 pianos and walls covered in music theory posters. She was waiting for him, sitting at one of the pianos with a cup of tea. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the bench beside her. Daniel sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're famous now," Mrs. Kim said finally. "How does it feel?" "Weird. Overwhelming. Like it's happening to someone else." She nodded. "I've been teaching piano for 42 years. I've had students who were technically brilliant. Perfect pitch, flawless sight reading, could memorize Rachmaninoff in a week. You know what most of them are doing now?" Daniel shook his head. Accounting, law, engineering, they stopped playing. Because for them, piano was about being perfect. And perfection is exhausting. She took a sip of her tea. What you did at that talent show, that wasn't about being perfect. That was about being present. Being honest. That's much rarer. But I can't do it again, Daniel said quietly. I've tried. I sat at my keyboard last night and tried to play that way, and it doesn't work. It feels forced. Of course it does. You're trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, but lightning doesn't work that way. She played a simple scale, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The gift you gave people wasn't the music itself. It was the reminder that beautiful things can happen when we're brave enough to be imperfect. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. Another interview request, Mrs. Kim noticed. What are you going to do about all this attention? I don't know. People want me to perform. They want me to give interviews. But I'm not a performer. I'm not even really a pianist. I've been playing for 3 months. Then tell them that, Mrs. Kim said simply. Be as honest in your words as you were in that moment at the piano. Over the next few days, Daniel had to make some decisions. He couldn't ignore all the requests, and honestly, part of him was curious about where this could lead. He agreed to do the Morning Brew interview. He also accepted Dr. Winter's invitation to talk about his experience for her research. The call with Dr. Winters was surprisingly comfortable. She was in her 50s with a warm laugh and a genuine curiosity about his experience. I'm not interested in making you feel like a lab rat, she assured him. I just want to understand what was happening internally during that performance. Daniel did his best to explain. The panic, the blank mind, the instinct to play chopsticks, and then the strange flow state where his hands seemed to know what to do without conscious thought. Dr. Winters listened intently, occasionally asking questions. What you're describing is something we call spontaneous composition through embodied knowledge, she explained. Your conscious mind went offline, but your body had absorbed more from those 3 months of lessons than you realized. The theory, the chord progressions, the patterns, it was all in there. The panic actually helped in a way. It got your thinking mind out of the way and let your intuitive mind take over. So I didn't actually create anything special? Daniel asked, feeling slightly deflated. Oh no, you absolutely did. That's the point. The special part wasn't technical mastery. It was your willingness to be vulnerable, to play through the fear, to let something happen without trying to control it. I have doctoral students who've been playing for 20 years who can't do that. They're too worried about being wrong. The conversation stuck with Daniel. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't even particularly skilled. But he'd done something authentic, and apparently, that mattered more than he'd thought. Meanwhile, the internet kept doing its thing. Someone had made a documentary-style video essay about his performance, complete with musical analysis and slow-motion replays. It had gotten millions of views on its own. Artists were creating paintings inspired by the moment. A poet had written a piece about the courage of imperfect beauty and tagged him in it. But the ripple effects were what really amazed Daniel. People started sharing their own stories of creative accidents and unexpected moments. A woman posted about how she'd accidentally created her signature pottery technique when she dropped a piece and liked how the crack looked. A photographer talked about how his best shot ever was from when he'd fumbled his camera and accidentally hit the shutter. The hashtag accidental genius started trending, filled with people celebrating their beautiful mistakes. Teachers began using his video in classrooms. A middle school music teacher wrote to him, I showed your performance to my students who are terrified of their upcoming recital. It sparked the best conversation we've ever had about what it means to be brave in art. Thank you for giving them permission to be imperfect. A therapist specializing in anxiety mentioned his video in a professional article about the relationship between vulnerability and creativity. Daniel's viral moment demonstrates what happens when we stop trying to control our fear and instead channel it into something productive. His panic didn't disappear. He just played through it. The attention wasn't all positive, of course. Some classical music purists complained that celebrating a beginner's improvisation diminished the value of years of proper training. This is why classical music is dying, one comment read. We celebrate viral moments over actual skill. Daniel tried not to let those comments bother him, but they did sting a little. Others accused him of planning the whole thing for internet fame. No way that was spontaneous, someone tweeted. This was calculated from the start. Wake up, people. Daniel found this almost funny. If only they knew how genuinely terrified he'd been. But the supportive voices far outnumbered the critics. A famous concert pianist posted a video response where she played her own version of Chopsticks, then talked about how even professionals have moments of doubt and fear. Daniel reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place, she said. Not because I wanted to be perfect, but because I wanted to express something true. As the days passed and Daniel prepared for his television appearance, he found himself in the strange position of being both famous and completely unqualified. He was being asked to represent something bigger than himself, to speak about creativity and courage and the beauty of mistakes. It was flattering and terrifying in equal measure. Rachel helped him pick out an outfit for the TV interview. "Just be yourself," she said, straightening his collar. "That's what people connected with, not some polished performer. Just you being honest about what happened." "What if they ask me to play?" Daniel asked. "What if I freeze up again, but this time there's no magic moment?" "Then you freeze up," Rachel said. "And that's okay too. You don't owe anyone a repeat performance. You just have to show up and be real." The night before his flight to New York, Daniel sat at his keyboard at home. He didn't try to recreate the viral moment. He just played. Simple scales. A few songs from his beginner's book. And yes, Chopsticks, just the basic version, the way a kid would play it. It felt good. Quiet and uncomplicated and honest. His life had changed completely in less than a week, and he still wasn't sure what it all meant. But he was starting to understand that maybe the point wasn't to become a professional musician or capitalize on his moment of fame. Maybe the point was simpler than that. He'd reminded people, including himself, that creativity didn't require permission or perfection. It just required courage. The flight to New York felt surreal. Daniel had never flown first class before. The production company had upgraded his ticket, and he found himself in a wide leather seat with more legroom than he knew what to do with. The flight attendant offered him champagne, which he accepted even though it was 10 in the morning. He needed something to calm his nerves. Rachel had wanted to come with him, but she couldn't get the time off work on such short notice. So Daniel was alone with his thoughts, 30,000 feet in the air, heading toward a television appearance that millions of people would watch. His stomach churned with anxiety. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the comments on his video, something he'd been doing compulsively for days. Most of them were encouraging, but the pressure they created was intense. People had built up this moment in their minds. They'd turned his accidental improvisation into something mythical. What if he disappointed them? What if he sat down at the piano on live television and proved that the viral moment had just been a fluke? The hotel in Manhattan was nicer than anywhere Daniel had ever stayed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a bathroom bigger than his first apartment. He dropped his bag and immediately called Rachel. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Freaking out," he admitted. "What if I can't do it? What if I get up there and nothing happens?" "Then nothing happens," Rachel said firmly. "Daniel, you need to let go of this idea that you have to prove something. You already did the thing. It's done. The video exists. Now you just get to talk about it. That's all. But they're going to want me to play." "I know they are. And I've tried, Rachel. I've tried at home to get back to that place, and I can't. It's like trying to force yourself to have a dream you already had." There was a pause on the line. Then Rachel said something that shifted everything. "Maybe you're not supposed to recreate it. Maybe you're supposed to do something different. That night at the talent show, you weren't trying to be brilliant. You were just trying to survive the moment. Maybe that's what you need to do again. Just survive the moment, whatever it is." They talked for another 20 minutes before Daniel had to go. The show's producer had scheduled a pre-interview dinner, a chance to meet the host and go over the segment. Daniel changed into nicer clothes and headed downstairs, his heart pounding. The host was a woman named Christina, in her 40s with an easy smile and sharp eyes. They met at a restaurant near the studio, just the two of them in a quiet corner booth. She ordered wine. Daniel stuck with water, not trusting himself to drink anything that might loosen his tongue too much. "So," Christina said, once they'd gotten through the pleasantries, "tomorrow's going to be pretty straightforward. We'll talk about the video, what happened that night, how your life has changed. And yes, we have a piano in the studio. We'd love for you to play something, but no pressure. If you're not comfortable, we can skip that part." "Everyone's going to want me to play," Daniel said. "Probably," Christina agreed. "But here's the thing. I watched your video about 50 times. I read the comments. I talked to my team. You know what the real story is? It's not about a guy who can play piano. It's about a guy who was scared and did it anyway. That's what people connected with. So what do I do tomorrow? Christina leaned forward. Tell the truth. Whatever that truth is. If you sit at the piano and you're too nervous to play, tell them that. If you play and it's not as magical as the first time, that's okay too. The audience doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. Daniel slept terribly that night, waking up every few hours to check his phone. The video had hit 40 million views. The Morning Brew had posted a teaser about his appearance, and the comments were already flooding in. People were excited. People had expectations. Daniel felt like he was going to throw up. The morning of the show, a car picked him up at 5:30. The sun wasn't even up yet. The studio was in Midtown, a massive building with the show's logo emblazoned on the side. Inside, it was all controlled chaos. People rushing around with clipboards and headsets, cameras being positioned, lights being adjusted. Daniel was led to a dressing room and told to wait. A makeup artist came in and worked on his face, chatting casually while Daniel tried not to fidget. You're the piano guy, right? My daughter loved your video. She's been practicing piano every day since she saw it. You inspired her. The comment should have made Daniel feel good, but instead it made the pressure worse. People were watching. People were being influenced by what he'd done. What if he let them all down? Christina stopped by the dressing room 20 minutes before they went live. How are you feeling? Terrified, Daniel said honestly. Good. Use that. It worked before, right? She smiled. Remember, you're not here to perform. You're here to have a conversation. Just talk to me like we're back at the restaurant last night. The segment producer came to get him. They walked through the bright corridors to the stage. Daniel could hear the audience murmuring beyond the curtain. There were maybe 200 people out there. His chest tightened. This was just like the talent show, except millions more would be watching on television. The piano sat on the stage, gleaming under the lights. A beautiful grand piano that probably cost more than Daniel's car. He stared at it, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down on him. 60 seconds, someone said. Daniel took his place on the couch next to Christina's chair. The audience applauded as he walked out, a sound that both thrilled and terrified him. He waved awkwardly, trying to smile. The lights were so bright he could barely see the people watching. And we're live in 5, 4, 3. The producer counted down silently with her fingers, then pointed at Christina. Welcome back. If you've been online at all in the past week, you've probably seen our next guest's incredible video. He's the software engineer who turned a moment of stage fright into one of the most beautiful piano performances the internet has ever seen. Please welcome Daniel. More applause. Christina turned to him with that practiced television warmth. Daniel, thanks for being here. So let's start at the beginning. You'd been playing piano for how long? 3 months, Daniel said, his voice coming out steadier than he expected. I was very much a beginner. I still am, actually. And you were performing at your girlfriend's company talent show. What were you supposed to play? A simple Bach piece. I'd been practicing it for weeks. I knew it cold. Daniel found himself relaxing slightly. Christina was good at this, making it feel like a conversation rather than an interrogation. But when I sat down at the piano, my mind just blanked. Completely, I couldn't remember a single note. So you played chopsticks. I played chopsticks. Daniel confirmed, and the audience laughed. It was the only thing my fingers could remember in that moment. And I figured if I was going to embarrass myself, I might as well commit to it. So I played it like it was this dramatic, serious piece of music. And then something shifted. Yeah, I don't really know how to explain it. My hands just started adding things, variations, different chords. It was like I stopped thinking and started feeling, if that makes sense. Everything I'd learned in those 3 months of lessons just kind of came out all at once. Christina leaned in. The video has over 40 million views now. How has that changed your life? Daniel laughed. I mean, I'm here, aren't I? A week ago, I was debugging code and eating leftover pizza for dinner. Now I'm on national television. It's completely surreal. They talked for a few more minutes about the response, the comments from professional musicians, the way people had been inspired to share their own stories of creative accidents. Daniel felt himself relaxing into the conversation. This wasn't so bad. He could do this. Then Christina asked the question he'd been dreading. "So there's a piano right here. Would you be willing to play something for us?" The audience applauded enthusiastically. Daniel felt his mouth go dry. This was it. The moment where he either proved the viral video wasn't a fluke or revealed himself as a one-hit wonder. He stood up, his legs unsteady. The walk to the piano felt impossibly long. He sat on the bench, adjusted it slightly, and stared at the keys. His hands were shaking. The audience waited. The cameras watched. Millions of people at home were watching. Daniel could feel all of it, the weight of expectation pressing down on him like a physical force. He tried to find that place he'd been in during the talent show, that flow state where everything had just worked. But he couldn't access it. His mind was too loud, too full of fear and pressure and the desperate need to prove himself. His fingers hovered over the keys. Nothing came. The silence stretched out, becoming uncomfortable. Someone in the audience coughed. Daniel felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. And then something shifted in him. A realization. He wasn't at the talent show anymore. He wasn't that terrified guy who'd had no choice but to let go and trust the moment. He was here now in a different moment entirely, and maybe that was okay. Daniel took a breath and did something he hadn't planned. He turned to face Christina and the audience, his hand still resting on the keys. "I can't do it," he said quietly. Then louder, more clearly. "I can't recreate what happened that night." The studio went completely silent. Daniel could see the producer in the wings looking alarmed, probably wondering if they needed to cut to commercial. But Christina just nodded, encouraging him to continue. So he did. "I've spent the last week trying to recreate that moment," Daniel said, his voice carrying across the quiet studio. "I've sat at my keyboard at home trying to find that same feeling, that same flow. And it doesn't work. Because that night at the talent show, I wasn't trying to be brilliant. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just terrified and desperate and trying to survive the moment. That's what made it special. I let go of trying to control everything." He turned back to the piano, his hand still resting on the keys. "Right now, I'm not in that place. I'm thinking too much. I'm too aware of all of you watching. I'm too aware of the 40 million people who saw the video and might be disappointed if I can't do it again." He paused, and that's okay. "Because the thing I'm learning is that you can't force magic. You can't manufacture authenticity. All you can do is show up honestly wherever you are." The audience was completely focused now, leaning forward in their seats. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. A quiet acceptance. "So here's what I can do," he said. "I can play chopsticks for you. Just the basic version, the one that every kid learns, because that's where it all started and that's what's true for me right now in this moment." He turned back to the keys and began to play. The simple melody, 2 fingers at a time, exactly the way a child would play it. No embellishments, no improvisation, just chopsticks in its purest, most basic form. Something about it was perfect. The vulnerability of it, the honesty of a beginner playing a beginner's song. The audience sat in silence and Daniel could feel that they understood. This wasn't about technical skill or viral moments. This was about having the courage to be exactly who you were, right where you were. He played through the simple tune once, twice, and then, without planning it, without trying to force anything, his fingers began to wander, not into the complex improvisation of the viral video, but into something gentler, simpler variations, a different chord here, a small melodic change there, nothing fancy. Just small, honest explorations of the familiar melody. It wasn't as spectacular as the talent show performance. It wouldn't get millions of views or inspire music professors to write papers, but it was real. It was him in this moment doing what he could do. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. Then the audience erupted into applause. Not the thunderous, shocked applause of the talent show, but something warmer, more intimate. Christina was smiling as he returned to the couch. "That was incredibly brave," she said. "To admit you couldn't recreate the magic and then to play anyway." "It was either that or run off the stage," Daniel joked, and the audience laughed. The rest of the interview flowed easily. They talked about what he'd learned from the experience, about the messages he'd received from people around the world. Daniel found himself relaxing completely, speaking from the heart about creativity and fear and the beauty of imperfection. "So, what's next for you?" Christina asked as they wrapped up. Are you going to pursue music professionally? Daniel shook his head. No, I don't think so. I'm going to keep taking lessons from Mrs. Kim. I'm going to keep playing, keep learning, but not because I'm trying to become some kind of viral sensation or professional musician, just because I enjoy it, because it taught me something important about letting go and trusting the moment. After the show, Daniel felt lighter than he had in days. The pressure had lifted. He'd been honest about his limitations and the sky hadn't fallen. If anything, people seemed to appreciate the honesty even more. The segment aired that afternoon. Daniel watched it in his hotel room with Rachel on FaceTime. The comments that flooded in were different from the ones on the original video. People weren't analyzing his technique or calling him a genius. Instead, they were thanking him for being real. This is what we need more of, one comment read. Not perfection, just people being brave enough to be themselves. Another said, I've been putting off trying things because I'm afraid I won't be good enough. Watching this guy admit he can't recreate his viral moment and then play anyway just gave me the courage to start. A teacher wrote, I'm showing this to every one of my students who's afraid to fail. This is what real courage looks like. Daniel flew back to Seattle the next day. The requests for interviews and appearances continued, but they felt different now. Less urgent. He turned down most of them, accepting only the ones that felt meaningful. A podcast about overcoming creative fear. A video call with a music therapy program, a short piece for a magazine about the unexpected gifts of vulnerability. Mrs. Kim welcomed him back to lessons with a knowing smile. You learned the most important lesson, she said, that you don't have to be perfect to be worthwhile. That lesson took me 20 years to learn. You got it in 3 months and 1 viral video. They worked on basic technique, scales, and simple songs. Daniel found he enjoyed the lessons more now. There was less pressure to be impressive and more room to simply learn. Sometimes his fingers would wander into improvisation, and Mrs. Kim would let him explore. Sometimes he just practiced his exercises. Both were valuable. Rachel noticed the change in him. You seem more relaxed, she said one evening as they cooked dinner together. Less worried about everything. I think I spent most of my life trying to avoid making mistakes, Daniel admitted. The viral moment taught me that sometimes the mistakes are the point. Sometimes they're where the real stuff happens. The video continued to spread, accumulating views and shares, but Daniel stopped checking the numbers compulsively. It had become something separate from him, a piece of internet culture that existed on its own. People still recognized him occasionally, at the grocery store or on the bus. He'd smile and thank them for watching, and that was enough. 3 months after the talent show, Daniel was invited to speak at a local high school's arts assembly. The auditorium was full of teenagers, many of them involved in music or theater or other creative pursuits. He told them the whole story, from the panic to the improvisation to the viral moment to the television appearance where he'd admitted he couldn't recreate the magic. The thing is, he said, wrapping up his talk, we live in a world that celebrates perfection. We see the finished product, the polished performance, the highlight reel. We don't see all the mistakes and failures and terrifying moments that came before, and that makes us think we have to be perfect too. But that's not how creativity works. That's not how life works. He gestured to the piano on the stage behind him. I'm not a great pianist. I'm still a beginner. But I had one moment where I let go of trying to be great and just let myself be present. And that moment connected with people, not because it was technically perfect, but because it was honestly vulnerable. A girl in the front row raised her hand. What if you try to be vulnerable and people laugh at you? What if your moment doesn't go viral? Daniel smiled. Most moments don't go viral. That's not the point. The point is showing up anyway. Being brave enough to try, even when you might fail. Even when people might laugh, he paused. Actually, people did laugh at me. At the beginning, when I started playing chopsticks, everyone laughed. But I kept playing. That's the part that mattered. After the assembly, several students came up to talk to him. A boy who was scared to audition for the school musical. A girl who wanted to share her art but was afraid it wasn't good enough. Daniel listened to each of them and offered the only advice he felt qualified to give. Do it scared. Do it imperfect. But do it. Life gradually returned to something resembling normal, though Daniel's normal had shifted in subtle ways. He still worked as a software engineer. He still had dinner with Rachel most nights and occasionally watched too much television. But he also played piano regularly, posting short videos to his social media not because he was trying to go viral again, but because he enjoyed sharing his progress. The videos rarely got more than a few thousand views, which was fine. Some were just him practicing scales. Some were simple songs from his lesson books. Occasionally, he'd improvise a little, playing with melodies and chords, seeing what happened. The comments were always encouraging, full of people who appreciated his willingness to share the unglamorous parts of learning. A year after the talent show, Rachel's company held another one. Daniel was invited to perform again, and this time he was ready. He played a proper piece, a simple Chopin nocturne he'd been working on for months. He made mistakes. He stumbled over a difficult passage in the middle. But he finished, and the applause was warm and genuine. Afterward, a young woman from the accounting department approached him. "I saw your viral video last year," she said. "It inspired me to start taking guitar lessons. I've always wanted to play, but I thought I was too old to start. Watching you just go for it, even as a beginner, gave me courage." These were the moments Daniel treasured most. Not the millions of views or the television appearance or the brief taste of internet fame, but these small personal connections. The reminder that vulnerability and courage could ripple outward in ways you'd never expect. He never did recreate the magic of that first improvisation. Sometimes he came close in quiet moments late at night when he was alone with his keyboard, and the pressure was off, but mostly he just played. He learned new songs, struggled through difficult passages, celebrated small victories, and forgave himself for mistakes. Mrs. Kim told him once during a lesson, "You know what I'm most proud of? Not the viral video, not the improvisation, but the fact that you kept coming back to lessons even after you got famous, that you were willing to stay a beginner, to keep learning without needing to be impressive. That's real dedication." Daniel thought about that a lot. In a world obsessed with instant success and viral moments, there was something radical about committing to the slow, unglamorous work of getting better, about showing up week after week to learn scales and theory, to practice finger exercises, to chip away at difficult pieces measure by measure. The viral video would always be part of his story. It had changed his life in meaningful ways, teaching him about courage and vulnerability and the strange, wonderful way that authentic moments could connect people across the world. But it wasn't the whole story. The whole story was what came after. The choice to keep playing, keep learning, keep showing up, even when nobody was watching or recording or waiting for magic to happen. On a random Tuesday evening, 2 years after the talent show, Daniel sat at his keyboard at home. Rachel was reading on the couch. Rain pattered against the windows. He played through a few songs just for the pleasure of it. His fingers moved across the keys with more confidence now, though he still had so much to learn. He thought about that terrified guy who'd sat at a piano in front of 200 people, his mind blank with panic. He thought about the moment he'd decided to play chopsticks and commit to the absurdity. And he thought about everything that had come after, all the ways that one moment of vulnerability had changed not just his life, but apparently many others as well. Then Daniel did what he did most evenings now. He let his fingers wander, improvising gently over familiar melodies, exploring sounds and chords, making mistakes and following them to see where they led. Nobody was recording. Nobody would see this. And that was perfect. Because this was the real magic. Not the viral moments, but the everyday choice to create something, to try something, to be present with the music and see what happened. The rain continued. Rachel turned a page of her book, and Daniel kept playing one imperfect note at a time.